What is up, everybody? My name is Josh. I am the fantasy football buff, and welcome to the channel. Welcome to the channel that is dedicated to the mastery of Dynasty fantasy football. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Like I said, all we do is talk Dynasty here, whether that be trades, whether that be we're hyping up some rookies, strategy, player rankings, all of that. So if that's something you're into, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Join the crew. Guys, today we're going to be talking about two quarterbacks and Superflex leagues. Because that's the only way to play Dynasty Fantasy Football. If you're not playing that way, we got to change that up, man. The goal of this video is to help you strategically understand the complexity of a two-quarterback league. So we're going to establish three different things in this video. Number one, we're going to establish how to value quarterbacks in two-quarterbacks leagues. Number two, we're going to identify how to find legit fantasy quarterbacks. And number three, we're going to go through different draft and roster construction strategies that you should follow in your leagues, guys. That's enough talking. Let's get it. All right, guys, I'm going to kick this episode off with a question. Are you looking to join a Dynasty league? Are you in a situation where you have been interested in joining Dynasty, have been heard about it for years, and it's something you're interested in, wants a bigger challenge than a redraft, but don't have people to play with, right? Don't have someone to coordinate that league for you? Gentlemen, look no further. We are starting a multiple followers leagues right after the NFL draft. So we're still hashing out all the details. We're still planning on our end, but subscribe, join our Discord, and message me on Discord to get on the wait list. Right, guys, Dynasty is my favorite hobby, and I'm trying to hook y'all up, right? I'm gonna set up individual Discord channels for each league. I'll personally moderate each league, and we'll have prizes for the winners, guys. It's gonna be a good time. So join the community on Discord and get on that wait list because we are going to get popping here soon as that NFL draft happens. All right, guys, let's get to the information that you guys came for. Right, today we're going to be talking about how to value quarterbacks in your two quarterbacks league. And the reality is, I'm sure you guys have seen the ADP, right? In two QB leagues, quarterback value skyrockets for a number of reasons. Reason number one is depth, right? In a redraft league, we have always been told to wait on quarterback. And the reason's very simple, right? Last season, the quarterback 23, Drew Lock, right, last season averaged 15 points per game. So if you're in a 12-man league and your starter gets injured, I'm going to the waiver wire and picking up Drew Lock. It doesn't matter, right? I'll replace him. In Dynasty, this just isn't the case, though, right? Startable depth is not there in your Dynasty leagues, right? There are only 32 quarterbacks who play football on any given Sunday, right? So excluding injury, the quarterback 33 on any given weekend has zero value. Right, they did not put up any points because they are on the bench. It's unlike any other position. Depth is so important, and if you're in a 10, 12, 14 team league and everyone has 2 to 3 to 4 quarterbacks on their roster, there's nobody that you can start on that waiver wire if one of your players get injured. So they become such more valuable Dynasty assets. Number two is points scored. Right, this past season, Matthew Stafford was the quarterback 15 in points per game. Right, he averaged 16 points per game. Now, if you look at the running backs, Mike Davis was the running back 15 in half PPR leagues, and he actually averaged 11 points per game. Brandon Cooks was the wide receiver 15, and he averaged 12 points per game. So not only is there more startable depth, right? Like I just said, Drew Lock this past season averaged 15 points per game, but they on average score more points, right? If you had Mike Davis on your roster and you're in a Superflex league, or you had Matthew Stafford at the end of the season, the team that had Matthew Stafford scored more points on a week-by-week basis, right? So I'm going to go to Fantasy Pros, right, and see who finished with the most fantasy points on the season, just players overall, players in general, right? And in total points scored on the season, top 10 of those players, when it comes just to points scored, were quarterbacks, right? So if you're looking on a week-by-week basis, the quarterbacks are where those top 10, top 15 quarterbacks are where you're going to find the majority of the points. And if you don't have that, then your team's going to be at a major disadvantage. And so just to paint a quick picture for you guys, let's say hypothetically speaking, you had Team A and Team B, and Team A only had Tom Brady and Ryan Tannehill the entire season, and Team B had Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara, who were the RB1 and 2 on the season. Team Brady and Tannehill won, right? So even though they're top 8 fantasy quarterbacks, they still put up more points than Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara once it's all said and done. So this does change a little bit in PPR leagues, right? In full PPR leagues, Devontae Adams finished as 8th overall, meaning there are still 7 quarterbacks ahead of him. Things you got to take into consideration, right? At the end of the day, the math adds up. Quarterbacks score more points, right? And then you have more year-to-year consistency, right? We already just talked about the importance of a top 15 fantasy quarterback. And in Dynasty, we're looking for continuity, right? We're looking for guys that you can start this year, next year, and the year after, and potentially from there on out, right? But I always say look towards the next 3 years. So I looked in the past a little bit. I went through Fantasy Pros when it comes to points scored. And in 2017 and 2018, right, over that time, when it comes to the top 15 fantasy quarterbacks, 10 repeated, right? So 10 of the top 15 quarterbacks in 2017 were also top 15 quarterbacks in 2018. You saw them carry over. Well, in 2018 to 2019, 9 quarterbacks finished in the top 15 in back-to-back years. And in 2019 to 2020, another 9 quarterbacks finished in the top 15 back-to-back years, right? And we're seeing with quarterbacks, age is no longer a factor, right? When it comes to dynasty value for running backs, for wide receivers, they get to a certain age and everyone's freaking out and trying to trade these guys. Aaron Rodgers is about to turn 38, and the man just had one of the best fantasy years of his career, right? That's why, and for all these reasons, in 2 QB leagues, the vast majority of those first-round picks are going to be quarterbacks, right? Their value is just that high. Now, the next trick is to find quarterbacks that are going to be fantasy valuable, right? And there's 3 different things that I look for when it comes to fantasy value for quarterbacks, just in general. And number 1 is volume, right? How many times is this quarterback going to pass the ball? And you have to look at their situation a little bit, right? What scheme are they playing in? What does their defense look like, right? If they're on a team that's defense is terrible and they're going to be having to catch up every single week, they're going to pass the ball more. They're going to put up more yards. They're going to need to throw for more touchdowns. And that's going to translate to fantasy value. 2 years ago, Jameis Winston finished higher in fantasy points scored than Russell Wilson. I'm not going to sit here and argue that Jameis Winston is a better real-life quarterback than Russell Wilson. Not even close. Right, but just the fact that he was throwing the ball more and he didn't have Pete Carroll insisting that they need to run the ball more, he ended up scoring more points and was better for your fantasy team. Number 2, and the second thing that I look at to determine a quarterback's fantasy value is their surrounding situation. What do their offensive weapons look like? What's their O-line look like? Right? And again, who is their head coach? These are things you have to take in consideration. Like in redraft leagues, look at Tom Brady this past season, man. I remember coming into this season, looking at Tom Brady, looking at the weapons around him, how they upgraded that offensive line. And he finished as the quarterback 10 on the season, and it wasn't surprising to me. You just looked at it and there was just too much talent on that roster for him not to blow up, right? And we see that year and year and year with Patrick Mahomes. Right, you look at the weapons around him, you look at the scheme he plays in, and then you calculate in his own personal talent, and there's a reason why he will be the quarterback 1 over the next 5 to potentially 10 years. And the third and most important factor that I look for in a fantasy quarterback is rushing ability. Right, guys, there's so much research, so many analytics, articles, all of that is out there on why rushing quarterbacks are good for your fantasy roster. So I'm going to break it down really simply for you guys. 7 of the top 10 fantasy quarterbacks this past season had at least 50 rushing attempts. I'll say that again. 7 of the top 10 fantasy quarterbacks in 2020 had at least 50 rushing attempts. And those 3 quarterbacks that didn't have 50 rushing attempts, they were all in the top 8 in the NFL in passing touchdowns. What does that say to me? Right? It is really, really difficult to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback if you're not rushing the ball. That's what it comes down to. And with rookies coming in like Jalen Hurts, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, even Trevor Lawrence, who's got some legs under him, right? These rushing quarterbacks are going to come in and continue to push down non-rushing quarterbacks. That's why for me personally, if you're just a strictly pocket passer, right, a quarterback that doesn't really rush the ball very much, you're not going to be on a lot of my fantasy teams just because of that baseline that comes with rushing the ball. So we've talked about how important quarterbacks are in general, right? We've talked about how to identify elite fantasy quarterbacks. Now let's wrap up with a little dynasty quarterback strategy here. There are four quarterback drafting strategies for 2-quarterback and Superflex leagues. And I'm actually going to break down some information from an article that drastically helped me this past offseason from the Fantasy Footballers. I found it on the website. I'm going to put it in the link below. Guys, it was written by Michael Wenrick, and this article is fantastic. He breaks down 4 different strategies. And strategy number 1 is the 2-stud quarterback strategy, right? You're in your dynasty startup league, and your first 2 picks are quarterbacks. Now, when it comes to a point advantage and a continuity advantage, and the fact that you have those 2 quarterbacks that you don't even have to think about on a week-to-week basis is a large advantage to your team. Now, it does hinder your team a little bit in the sense that you're sacrificing at other positions. And the reality is that, like we talked about, quarterback is deep, right? So if you have your 2 top 3 quarterbacks, and you sacrificed everywhere else, and you're going against a team that has 2 top 8 quarterbacks, but has a couple elite wide receivers, maybe a couple elite running backs, your team's going to struggle because the difference between your top 2 elite quarterbacks and their top 8 quarterbacks really isn't that much, and you sacrifice so much else on the rest of your roster. Strategy number 2, and this is my personally favorite strategy, is the 1 stud, 1 middle tier quarterback. Right, you get your stud, you get your cornerstone piece, the guy, you probably spent a 1st or 2nd round pick on him, and he will be that baseline on a week-to-week basis for the next 2 to 3 years for your team, right? And then you kind of play the streaming game with a rotation of quarterbacks on the rest of your roster, right? So ideally for me, if I could have Josh Allen or Deshaun Watson or Kyler Murray as my quarterback 1 that I don't even have to think about, and then have a Ryan Tannehill, right? Have a Matthew Stafford or Kirk Cousins, who's more of a much cheaper, much more affordable top 12, top 15 quarterback that I can rotate in, given up the matchup any given week, then you still get those elite quarterback fantasy points, but you'll probably still have good enough running backs and wide receivers elsewhere that your team is going to be more balanced overall, and your team is likely to succeed. The third strategy, and this is a very, very popular strategy amongst redraft players that are transitioning to Dynasty, is the 2 middle tier quarterback strategy, right? Where you load up everywhere else, right? You start the first 2, 3, 4 rounds, and you get your wide receiver and running back cornerstone pieces that you wanted. Then rounds 4 and 7 come around, and you got to go quarterback, right? You get stacked you get your cornerstone pieces at other positions, and if you do figure out how to get to play the streaming game and rotate these quarterbacks out, from a points perspective, this can be very valuable if you play it right? Your team can have a lot of success if you're still getting those elite quarterback points by playing that streaming game with your 3 to 4 middle tier quarterbacks. But there is a little bit of danger, right, when it comes to this strategy as well. When it comes to these middle tier guys, just because these middle tier guards aren't as safe as you might believe, right? There's a team in my league that has Carson Wentz and Jared Goff. He went with this strategy, and he went with these 2 players, and in the moment it sounded great, right? You got 2 young quarterbacks who have excellent contracts, who chances are will be around for the foreseeable future. 1 season passed, and we're not even sure if those quarterbacks will have a job next season. Right, quarterback job security is riskier than it ever has been before, especially with this oncoming stacked rookie draft class, right? So, and there's also, with this strategy, you also run the risk of missing out on quarterbacks at all, right? If you're in round 4, round 5, and say, okay, I'm going to pick my wide receiver 2, my running back 2 here, and then I'll wait around. Maybe a quarterback run happens, and all of a sudden you're sitting there in your startup with no viable quarterbacks left. So it's risky. And that leads to strategy number 4, and that is the streaming quarterback strategy, right? What is a quarterback anyway? Do you even really need one on your roster? I mean, a streaming quarterback works really well in redraft. And guys, I'm just going to tell you right now, it's not a great dynasty strategy. I mean, there's a lot of pros, strategically speaking, when everyone's zigging, you're zagging, right? They go one way, you go the other. While everyone's picking up your quarterbacks, you're getting those elite running backs and those elite wide receivers. The rest of your team will be stacked. But let me just quickly reference this very article that I'm talking about. that came out early 2020, and I'm going to let it speak for itself on why I wouldn't go this route, right? They recommend, if you do follow the strategy, to get stacked everywhere else, and then they say pick up Derek Carr, Sam Darnold, Nick Foles, Marcus Mariota, Ryan Fitzpatrick, and Josh Rosen. So let's say hypothetically you followed this strategy. I don't know how your past year went, but going into 2021, you probably don't have any starting quarterbacks on your roster. And I don't care what the rest of your roster looks like. If you don't have quarterbacks you can start, your team will struggle, right? Your team will definitely struggle. And in Dynasty, I hate to be in a situation where I need something. Where I never in Dynasty want to put myself where I need to trade for a player. I need to draft a player, right? Because if you do that, you're going to end up losing value. You're going to end up giving up more than you should have. You're going to end up drafting a quarterback over a potential Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb in the draft because you needed a quarterback. This is going back, of course, to last season. So personally, I like the top two strategies, right? If I can leave a draft or even an offseason with 2 top 8 quarterbacks, right? A single developing top 15 quarterback, right? Give me a Jalen Hurts, something of that nature, right? And then a veteran top 20 fantasy quarterback that I can fill in for bye weeks. If I can have those 4, where I have 2 higher tier guys, 1 younger middle tier guy, and then an older top 20 guy that I can just fill in for bye weeks, I will feel very comfortable and very, very satisfied going into this season. Guys, that's all for me, right? That's a little strategy for you guys. I know it's a shorter video, but I wanted to break down. There's just not enough information out there when it comes to 2 quarterback leagues, and I know your startup draft is coming, so you want to make sure you're prepared. Guys, if you're new, please hit that subscribe button. If you're trying to join a Dynasty League, hit me up, join our Discord, and message me to get on that wait list. Guys, I appreciate your time, and we'll be back soon. Peace.